The coach slapped a 14-year-old boy in front of the whole gym for saying his grandpa trained counter-terror units. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sound of fists hitting bags echoed through the MMA gym like a steady drumbeat. It was Thursday evening, and the room buzzed with heat and movement. Sweat clung to the air, the mats, the gloves. A group of teenagers trained under the watchful eye of Coach Trent, a broad-shouldered man with a voice that cracked like a whip and a presence that demanded attention. He barked commands like they were gospel, and no one dared challenge him. No one, except the boy standing quietly in the far corner. Elias, 14, thin, focused, with eyes that scanned every move and absorbed everything. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but there was something precise about him. He didn't talk much. He didn't show off. He trained with the kind of quiet hunger that made you forget how young he was. He adjusted his shin guards with care as the others took a short water break. One of the older students nudged him. "Hey," the boy said, smirking, "why'd you even start training here? You don't exactly look like you could take a punch." Elias looked up calm, his voice soft but certain. "My grandfather used to train counter-terror units in Europe. He taught me the basics." The room stalled just for a second, like air being sucked out of a balloon. Then came the laughter, the kind that's sharp, mean, and designed to wound. "Your grandpa," someone echoed. "What is he?" Some retired movie extra. Another boy made an exaggerated salute. "Yes, sir. Commander Grandpa Schwarzenegger reporting for duty." Coach Trent, sipping from his bottle, turned to the noise. "What's going on?" he asked, half amused, half annoyed. "Little man over here says his grandpa trained special forces." Someone called out. Coach Trent grinned and strode over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Oh, really?" he said, voice rising so the whole gym could hear. "Your grandpa trained what now?" Elias didn't back down. His eyes stayed steady. "He trained with European special units before moving to the States. He doesn't talk about it much." The coach let out a loud, dismissive laugh. "Let me get this straight. You're telling me your grandfather was some kind of international warrior turncoach, and now he's, what? Sitting at home knitting scarves." The boys burst into fresh laughter, louder this time, fueled by Trent's tone. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He just stood there quietly. Trent stepped closer. "This isn't Hollywood, kid. This is a gym. You don't earn respect by spinning fairy tales. You earn it on the mat." "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," Elias said, voice calm but firm. The shift was subtle. The grin on Coach Trent's face faded. His expression hardened into something colder. "No," he said. Then, without warning, Trent's hand snapped forward. A sharp slap rang through the room like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the students. Elias stumbled back a step, his hand go to his cheek, but he didn't fall. He didn't cry. His face turned red where the impact bloomed, but his eyes never left the floor. He stood there, chest rising and falling, breath shallow but controlled. The gym went quiet. Trent's voice broke the silence, casual and dismissive. "Enough fairy tales. Everyone back to work. Let's go." Some students moved hesitantly. Others glanced at Elias, unsure whether to laugh, to speak, or pretend they hadn't seen anything. No one helped him. No one questioned the slap. Trent had done this before. Maybe not so openly, maybe not with sound that still echoed in their ears, but the power had always been his. Elias returned to the far corner of the gym. He tied his gloves tighter. Not because he was going to spar. No one paired up with him. But he tied them anyway, the straps digging into his wrists like anchors. He didn't touch the mark on his face. He didn't ask for sympathy. He just kept moving. Time stretched long after that. The minutes felt heavy. The session ended, as usual, with the bell. The kids packed up, chatting and joking like nothing had happened. No one mentioned Elias. No one said goodbye. He left in silence. Outside, the air was cooling. The sky glowed with that deep bruised purple of early dusk. Elias walked home without music, without earbuds, just the sound of his footsteps and the sting still burning on his cheek. He didn't cry. He didn't speed up. He took the long way, past the river, past the closed diner, where his grandfather used to take him for breakfast on weekends. His fingers stayed clenched in his pockets. By the time he reached the house, the porch light was already on. In the garden, an older man was kneeling by a row of tomato plants, gently brushing dirt away from the stems. He wore a worn plaid shirt and a cap pulled low over silver hair. His hands moved with calm precision, as if the world could wait for whatever he was doing to be finished. The man didn't look up when Elias opened the gate. He just said, without turning, "You're home late." Elias didn't answer. He walked up the porch steps, his bag slung over one shoulder. The man finally looked up. He saw the red on Elias's cheek, the shape of a hand, the silence that followed. He stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask questions. He simply walked to the front door, opened it, and held it for his grandson. "Wash your hands," he said. "Dinner's almost ready." Inside, the house smelled like roasted potatoes and something warm in the oven. Elias moved the sink without a word. The old man stepped to a wooden cabinet and opened a small drawer. He took something from inside, a metal badge, aged but still sharp at the edges. He placed it gently on the table, letting it catch the kitchen light. Elias turned and saw it. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak. The old man looked at him. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "You know what that is?" Elias nodded. "You show it to anyone?" "No, sir." "Good." The silence returned. Then the man said, "Some people don't need to know who you are until the moment they do." Elias stood still. The slap still burned, but something heavier had entered the room now. Not anger. Legacy. The morning light crept to the curtains in soft slants, casting golden bars across the wooden floor. Elias sat at the kitchen table, silent, staring into a bowl of cereal that had long gone soggy. The spoon rested in his hand, unmoving. The red mark on his cheek had faded overnight, but left behind a dull shadow, like the bruise of something deeper than just skin. Across from him sat his grandfather, sipping black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug. He hadn't said a word since Elias woke up. He hadn't needed to. The quiet wasn't cold. It was weighty, a stillness filled with things that didn't require explanation. The kind of silence shared between people who've seen enough to know that words aren't always the strongest response. Arnold set down his mug with a soft clink, then stood. His chair made no sound against the floor. He walked the hall, his broad figure moving with quiet purpose, and disappeared into his bedroom. Elias watched the doorway, unsure what came next. A few minutes passed. Then his grandfather returned, fully dressed. Plain jeans, a dark green button-down shirt, and the same weathered cap he always wore when he didn't want to be recognized. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen, glanced once at the untouched cereal, then said, "Put on your shoes." Elias blinked. "Where are we going?" Arnold didn't answer. He turned and walked to the front door, waiting, not rushing, not repeating, just waiting. Elias hesitated, then slowly stood up. He left the cereal where it was, walked to his room, and pulled on his sneakers with trembling fingers. The slap still echoed in his memory, more vivid than the pain itself. As he tied the laces, his mind spun with questions he didn't know how to ask. When he stepped out onto the porch, Arnold was already by the truck, the same dusty pickup that had carried lumber, tools, and once a Christmas tree too big to fit in the garage. Elias climbed into the passenger seat without a word. The engine rumbled to life, low and steady. The radio was off. No one spoke. They drove in silence, past rows of houses waking up, past a quiet park, past a little diner that still hadn't reopened since the fire last year. Elias glanced at his grandfather a few times, hoping for a clue, a sign, anything. But Arnold's face remained unreadable. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something older, heavier, like he was carrying a memory that didn't belong in the daylight. After 10 minutes, they pulled into a small parking lot. Elias recognized it before the truck came to a full stop. The gym, the one with the red mats and the cracked mirrors, the one where yesterday had happened. He looked at his grandfather, startled. "I don't have class today," he said quietly. Arnold turned off the engine and nodded. "I know." That was it. Elias sat frozen. His fingers clutched his bag, knuckles white. His heartbeat echoed louder than the engine ever had. Am I supposed to go in? He asked. Arnold opened the door and stepped out, leaving the question unanswered. The driver's side shut with a dull thud. Elias swallowed hard, then followed. The sunlight was brighter now, unforgiving. He felt like everyone could see the mark on his cheek, even if it had mostly faded. As they approached the front doors, his legs felt heavier with each step. Inside, the gym was already active. A few students were sparring. Others were stretching or filling water bottles. The energy was normal, maybe even cheerful, as if nothing had happened yesterday, as if slapping a kid across the face wasn't something worth remembering. Coach Trent stood near the center, arms folded, watching two teens throw lazy jabs. His head turned when the door opened and he saw them. His smile came instantly, wide, performative, a little too loud. Well, look who's back, he said, his voice carrying over the room. Didn't get enough yesterday, huh? A few heads turned. Some students smirked. Others looked away, uneasy. Elias stopped just inside the door. His grandfather stepped past him, walking calmly to the edge of the mat. He didn't speak. He didn't square his shoulders or puff his chest. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, observing. Coach Trent's eyes moved from Elias to the older man. He squinted, then let out a small chuckle. Let me guess. You're here to file a complaint? Or maybe tell your bedtime stories in person? Arnold didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. I'm just here to observe. But if you're done talking, I might have a few thoughts to share later. The sentence hung in the air like a warning bell that no one had expected to hear. Trent's expression faltered, just for a second. Then he scoffed. Listen, old man, this is my gym. I don't need a lecture from someone who probably got their muscles from holding a camera, not a barbell. Arnold didn't respond. He looked at Elias. Stretch out. Warm up. Elias blinked. Me? His grandfather nodded once. That was all it took. He moved toward the back, heart pounding. Every step felt exposed. But his feet remembered what to do. The same stretches they had done on the back porch. The same sequence, down to the breath counts. As his body moved, some of the fear melted. Not all of it, but enough to keep going. Arnold remained where he was, a still presence amid the clatter and noise. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to, but already something in the room had shifted. The laughter wasn't as loud. The punches weren't as careless. And Coach Trent had started pacing. Outside, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, but inside the gym, the air had grown colder. Not from the temperature, from the feeling that something real had just walked through the door and wasn't leaving. Elias moved to the warm-up slowly, his body stiff with tension, but each motion more familiar than the last. His arms stretched, his legs rotated. His breath followed the rhythm he had practiced for years, not in a gym, but on the grass in the garage, beside his grandfather's quiet coaching. Across the room, Coach Trent paced the mat like a lion marking territory. He was louder than usual, barking corrections that didn't land. His voice carried, but it lacked conviction. A few students still listened, but many stole glances toward the man standing by the door. Arnold hadn't moved. His arms were relaxed at his sides, his shoulders straight. He wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to intimidate, but his presence spoke louder than anything else in the room. He watched Elias, yes, but more than that, he watched everything. How the students responded, how the coach shifted his stance when challenged, how silence could sometimes say more than volume. Coach Trent couldn't take it anymore. What exactly are you trying to prove here? He called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. His smirk had returned, but was thinner now, stretched over something anxious. Arnold turned his head slightly. I'm not here to prove anything, he said. That's your thing. The room paused. A few students chuckled under their breath, but it wasn't the mocking kind. It was something else, an involuntary reaction to the sharpness of the moment. Trent's jaw tightened. He took a step forward. You think you're better than me? That you know more about running a gym? Arnold's voice remained even, but his eyes narrowed just enough. I think you hit a kid for telling the truth, and now you're performing. Gasps moved through the gym like a ripple. A few students stopped moving completely. One of them lowered his gloves. Another shifted back a step, as if the tension had become physical. Trent raised his hands dramatically. You want to talk big? Fine. Step on the mat. Let's see what you've got. Arnold didn't respond right away. He scanned the room, slowly, deliberately, like someone evaluating not just a challenge, but the integrity of the space itself. Then he stepped forward. For a moment, it seemed like he was accepting the fight, but instead of raising his hands, he reached into his back pocket and pulled something small. He held it up between two fingers. A faded silver badge. Not flashy, not oversized. The kind of thing you only recognized if you'd seen it before. It glinted under the fluorescent lights as the room quieted. This used to mean something, Arnold said. Still does. He walked toward Elias, who had stopped mid-stretch. The boy froze as his grandfather extended the badge, not to the coach, but to him. He didn't place it in his hand. He let him look. But it's not mine that matters, Arnold continued. It's the one your student was trying to honor yesterday. Coach Trent's smile cracked. What is that supposed to be? A souvenir. Arnold didn't answer. He turned to Elias. We'll talk again after you train. Go finish what you started. Elias nodded slowly. He turned back to the mat and resumed his warm-up. This time, the movements had more weight. His posture had changed. Not proud, not defiant, just grounded, real. Around the room, something shifted. The smirks faded. The laughter didn't return. Even the sounds of sparring softened. More students began watching in silence. Trent wasn't done. He pointed. You, Marcus, 5 rounds. Now. Marcus, bigger and a year older, tapped his gloves together and approached Elias. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. They touched gloves half-heartedly, and the round began. Elias kept his guard up, feet light, circling with calm. His movements weren't perfect, but they were sharp, trained. He didn't look for approval. He didn't look at the coach. He didn't even look at Arnold. But he moved like he knew someone believed in him, and that changed everything. Arnold watched from the edge. He wasn't just watching Elias. He was watching Trent. The man's posture was rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes darting toward students who weren't focused on him anymore. He saw the difference. Arnold saw it too. Trust, once given freely, was starting to slip. Coach Trent broke the silence. You think standing there makes you better than me? His voice was louder, defensive. Arnold remained still. I've trained fighters, Trent continued, his tone rising. I built this place from nothing. Arnold finally spoke. You build it on fear. The words dropped like a hammer. Trent stepped forward. You don't know me. I know enough. In the back of the room, a voice whispered just loud enough to be heard. I think that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. The words spread fast. Heads turned. Eyes widened. A few phones came out, slowly, carefully, pretending to check messages, but hovering near the record button. No way, someone muttered. Is that really him? Trent forced a laugh, but it cracked. Come on, Arnold Schwarzenegger? In a dusty gym in the middle of nowhere, Arnold stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pose. He just spoke. I don't polish trophies, he said. I build character. The silence that followed was total. Trent clenched his fists. If you're really him, prove it. I'm not here to prove anything to you, Arnold said. But if you think hitting my grandson is a lesson in strength, then maybe I should show you what real strength looks like. A boy near the lockers dropped his phone. The plastic clatter echoed louder than expected. Trent's expression shifted, defensive, unsure. Elias stopped sparring for a moment and looked toward his grandfather. Their eyes met, and in that glance, everything changed. The room didn't belong to Coach Trent anymore. The gym felt smaller now. The walls hadn't moved, but the energy had. Every breath in the room seemed to wait on what would happen next. Coach Trent stood in the center, fists clenched, eyes locked on Arnold. His chest rose with shallow, uneven breaths. For all his bluster, Something behind his stare had cracked. The name carried weight, and the man standing in front of him carried it without saying another word. Arnold removed his cap with slow hands and set it gently on the bench nearby. He didn't stretch. He didn't crack his knuckles or roll his shoulders. He stepped forward onto the mat with the quiet composure of someone who didn't need to prove anything, but still would if pressed. Trent smirked. Try to hold on to control. Hope your Medicare covers this. Arnold didn't flinch. Trent lunged. The next 5 seconds happened too fast for most of the room to process. Arnold didn't move like a man his age was expected to move. He didn't dodge. He shifted, like water sliding around a falling stone. Trent's fist cut through air. In a single step, Arnold pivoted, gripped Trent's wrist, and used his own momentum against him. With one fluid motion, he swept Trent's leg out from under him, twisted, and brought the coach to the mat with a forceful, controlled pin. There was no thud, no scream, just the sudden, sharp stillness of impact. Trent's face was pressed sideways into the mat, his arm twisted behind him, immobilized but not broken. He grunted, trying to push up, but Arnold's grip didn't budge. "You got lucky," Trent spat. Arnold released the hold and stepped back. "No," he said simply. "You got arrogant." The silence was louder than applause. The students froze, watching the man they feared lie stunned and breathing hard. One boy dropped his gloves. Another student backed up slowly, eyes wide. Elias stood at the edge of the mat, unmoving, watching every second with quiet awe. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. But something inside him had shifted. His shoulders were higher. His chin no longer tucked. Arnold turned to face the room. "This isn't about winning," he said, voice calm but firm. "This isn't about who can shout louder or hit harder. It's about knowing when to stand up and when to kneel. Not because someone forces you to, because you choose to honor something greater than yourself." He walked over to Trent, who sat up slowly, rubbing his wrist, his face red with humiliation. Arnold looked him in the eyes. "I didn't come here to embarrass you," he said. "I came because you laid a hand on my grandson and made him feel small for telling the truth. That's not teaching. That's cowardice wrapped in a coach's uniform." Trent said nothing. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Arnold turned to the students. He looked at them one by one, not judging, not preaching, just letting his words sit in the air like dust after impact. "You want to be fighters?" he asked. "Then start by protecting those who can't fight back yet." The door to the gym opened. A woman stepped in, holding a press badge. Behind her, a small camera crew followed. One of the students had tipped them off. Word had started to spread. They had come looking for answers. But what they saw now wasn't scandal. It was something else. The reporter walked carefully toward Arnold, microphone in hand. "Mr. Schwarzenegger," she said, "do you have a statement? Is it true this coach assaulted your grandson yesterday?" Arnold glanced at the microphone, then past her to Elias. "The story's not about me," he said. "It's about what happens when people confuse power with permission." The cameraman continued filming. Arnold walked toward the front desk. Behind it, a framed certificate hung on the wall. It read, "Certified Master, Instructor, International Combat Federation." He studied it for a moment, then took it down, flipped it over, and examined the back. "You forged this yourself?" he asked, loud enough for the room to hear. "Or did someone help you?" Trent struggled to his feet. "That's real," he said. "I earned that." Arnold nodded. "Then I'm sure you won't mind if I call the Federation and confirm." A hush swept through the gym. One of the students, a girl with dark hair tied back, spoke up quietly. He said we had to pay extra if we didn't bring in new students. Said it was part of training. Another voice added, "I paid $500 last month just to keep my spot." Arnold turned to Elias. "Was that true for you too?" Elias nodded. "They said I had to bring someone in by Friday, or I'd be suspended." Arnold exhaled slowly, like he already knew the answer. "Then this is bigger than a slap," he said. "This is theft, hidden behind a gym membership." The reporter leaned in. "Would you be willing to speak on record?" Arnold turned back to the room. "You want a headline?" he said. Here it is. A man with no honor built a business by preying on kids who thought they were learning discipline, and he used fear to keep them quiet. Murmurs swept across the gym. Phones came out in full now. Faces once unsure were now filled with clarity, and for some, shame. Trent's face went pale. You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything I built? Arnold didn't raise his voice. You ruin it the moment you hit a child for telling the truth. Trent puffed out his chest. You're just a has-been. You haven't fought in years. Arnold stared at him. And you still couldn't last 30 seconds. A burst of laughter, nervous, honest, escaped from the back of the room. Someone clapped once before stopping themselves. Trent's fist trembled. You want a rematch? He barked. Right now. Full contact. Arnold shook his head. There's nothing left to prove. But if you're still that desperate for attention, you can fight the truth. It's already outside waiting. He walked over to the gym's whiteboard and picked up the marker. In one motion, he erased the name Coach Trent and wrote 2 words, earn honor. Then he faced the class. I don't run this place, he said, and I'm not here to take it over. What happens next is up to you. But just know, strength doesn't shout. It stands. And sometimes it kneels, not to surrender, but to lift others. He turned back to Elias, nodded once, and walked toward the door. And for the first time in that gym, no one followed Trent. By the time Arnold and Elias stepped back outside, the parking lot looked like a scene from a new special. Media vans had doubled. A drone hovered overhead. Reporters huddled with producers, whispering frantically into microphones. Pedestrians had stopped along the sidewalk. Some were filming, others simply stared. In the center of it all, Arnold walked through the chaos like it didn't exist. His eyes stayed forward. His posture didn't change. Elias followed behind, still clutching his gym bag, unsure what any of this meant. The video had already hit 10,000 shares. It wasn't just a takedown that went viral. It was the moment after, the silence, the quote, the way Arnold had erased Coach Trent's name from a board and replaced it with 2 words that now circle the internet. Earn honor. A woman from one of the local news stations rushed forward, camera crew in tow. Mr. Schwarzenegger. She called out, trying to keep pace. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? Just one statement for the record. Arnold paused at the driver's side door of his truck. He didn't look at her right away. Then, slowly, he turned and met her eyes. I don't do stunts, he said, and I don't do statements. I protect my family. He opened the door and climbed in. Elias followed on the passenger side. As the doors shut, a dozen phones tried to capture one last shot through the window. But Arnold wasn't posing. He started the engine like nothing had happened. They pulled away, leaving behind a cloud of questions and a gym full of silence. Back inside, Coach Trent stood frozen in the center of the mat. His students no longer looked at him with respect. They looked at him like a mask had slipped off. 2 boys stepped away from the wall where they'd been leaning and walked straight past him without speaking. A girl grabbed her bag and followed. One by one, they started leaving. Trent shouted, "This is still my gym." No one responded. By the time Arnold and Elias got home, the video had hit 50,000 views. Elias sat quietly on the edge of the couch, staring at his phone, watching the numbers climb. Arnold didn't ask what he was looking at. He walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove like it was any other day. But it wasn't any other day. Across town, the news segment was already airing. Headlines read, "Teen slapped by coach. Grandfather steps in and brings justice." Photos of Arnold in the gym spread across social media. Clips of him speaking about power and permission were stitched into viral edits with music, slow-motion replays, and text overlays. The quote, "Strength doesn't shout. It stands," was already printed onto digital posters. Arnold didn't watch any of it. He sat on the porch as the sun went down, sipping tea. Elias eventually joined him, still holding his phone. He didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, he asked, "Do you think he'll lose everything?" Arnold looked out across the yard. If he built it with lies, he already has. Inside the gym, the fallout had begun. Parents were calling. Some were furious. Others were heartbroken. They wanted refunds. They wanted explanations. Several demanded meetings. Others posted screenshots, conversations, payment histories, pressure tactics. One father shared a clip he'd secretly recorded of Trent yelling at a student for not recruiting new members. That clip alone hit 100,000 views by nightfall. The next morning, the gym was closed. A paper sign taped to the glass read, "Closed for maintenance." No one believed it, but the story didn't stop there. At noon, a quiet knock came at Arnold's door. A young woman stood on the porch with a notepad in one hand and no camera crew behind her. She wore a press badge but no makeup. She introduced herself as a national features reporter. She asked for 5 minutes. Arnold gave her 10. They sat on the porch, the sun filtering through the leaves above. "I've interviewed athletes, CEOs, politicians," she said. "But you're different." "I'm not a fighter," Arnold replied. "I'm a witness. I've seen what happens when silence becomes permission." "Why now?" she asked. "Why step in this time?" He pointed to the backyard, where Elias was running slow drills on the grass with 2 other kids. They weren't sparring. They were practicing footwork, balance, awareness. "Because someone finally needed me to." The reporter paused, watching the boys. "Do you think the gym will recover?" she asked. Arnold didn't answer immediately. Then he shook his head. "A place built on fear doesn't need recovery. It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up." She scribbled in her notebook, then stood. "Thank you for your time." As she walked down the steps, Arnold added quietly, "Don't tell my story. Tell theirs." That evening, as the sky darkened and the crickets started singing, Elias sat on the porch steps again, barefoot, the soles of his feet stained with dust from a yard. He looked up at Arnold, who stood quietly with a glass of water in one hand. "You think they'll come back?" Elias asked. "They already have," Arnold replied. And he was right. In the distance, more kids were arriving. Some came on bikes, others with their parents. They didn't bring contracts. They didn't bring forms. They brought gloves, water bottles, hope. They stood by the gate, not looking for a coach to shout at them, but a reason to believe again. Arnold didn't move. He just watched, observing, not instructing, not performing. And in that quiet, dusty backyard, something had begun. Not a new gym, a new way. By the next morning, the gym's glass doors remained dark, locked from the inside. The "closed for maintenance" sign hung crooked, flapping slightly in the breeze. But no one believed the excuse anymore. No staff showed up. No lights turned on. The neighborhood already knew. And online, the truth had taken root. Hundreds of comments flooded in beneath the viral clip. Some in support, some in disbelief, and many from former students sharing their own stories of silence and shame. But a few miles away, something entirely different was happening. In the dusty backyard behind Arnold's modest home, Elias was already warming up. His footwork carved soft circles into the dry grass, each step more confident than the last. The old mats had been pulled from storage, wrinkled, sun-stained, but clean. No mirrors, no punching bags, just space and silence. One by one, kids began arriving. They didn't knock. They didn't ask for permission. They came with gloves slung over shoulders, water bottles in hand, and eyes filled with quiet hope. Some came with parents who lingered by the gate, unsure of what they were stepping into. Others came alone, heads down, uncertain if this was even allowed. But they came, and Arnold didn't send anyone away. He didn't make announcements. He didn't create a schedule. He just stood by the porch with arms folded, watching, observing. His presence wasn't loud. It was steady, like a foundation. Elias led the warm-up. His voice was soft, but clear. He called out the stretches, counted the movements, adjusted posture when needed. The others followed, not because they were told to, but because he moved with the quiet conviction of someone who had earned the right to lead. It wasn't perfect. One boy tripped during footwork drills. A girl got frustrated trying to match pace. But when mistakes happened, the group didn't laugh. They slowed down. They helped. No one barked orders. No one mocked. Arnold didn't intervene often. Sometimes he walked among them, offering a gentle hand to correct a stance. Other times, he stood back completely, letting them figure out together. When he did speak, it was never more than a few words. But those words landed with weight. The day passed without structure, but not without purpose. The kids trained until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard. When it was time to stop, no bell rang. No timer vas. They just knew. Elias stood beside Arnold as the last of them packed up. Do you think they'll come back tomorrow? He asked. Arnold didn't look away from the yard. They already decided. By the end of the week, the group had doubled. Word spread quietly. No flyers, no posts, just whispers between classmates and shared glances at school. Kids who'd been too afraid to speak were now asking if they could come. Some brought siblings. Others brought questions. But all of them brought the same thing, the need for something real. Parents began stopping by more often. They stood at the edges of the yard, watching silently. One mother whispered to another, "My son used to come home angry. Now he just listens." A father stood with folded arms and nodded when his daughter executed a clean pivot. No one applauded, but the air was full of approval. Inside the old gym, chaos unraveled. Trent hadn't returned. Legal complaints had been filed. An ethics investigator from the Federation confirmed the certification on the wall had been falsified. More videos surfaced, some from over a year ago. The gym's license was suspended pending review. No one came to train anymore. Meanwhile, Arnold's backyard became something else. Not a business, not a rebellion, a community. No rules were posted. No fees were collected. But everyone knew the expectations. Show up, be honest, help each other. Elias took to rolling the mats out before anyone arrived. He lined up the gloves in rows, straightening them like they mattered, because they did. One afternoon, a girl who hadn't spoken all week stayed after the others left. She stood quietly by the tree near the fence, then approached Arnold with a folder in her hands. Inside were signatures, parents, neighbors, even students. A list of names asking if this could become something more. Maybe even rent a space. Arnold looked at the papers, then at the yard. "Do you know why this works?" he asked. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Because of you?" He shook his head. "Because no one here is trying to be the loudest voice. They're just showing up for the right reason." She smiled. "So is that a yes?" "It's a maybe," he said, and that was more than enough. Later that night, as Elias sat on the porch with a towel around his neck and dust on his shoes, Arnold sat beside him with a glass of water. They didn't talk for a while. The stars were just starting to peek through the clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then silence again. "Did you ever have to deal with someone like Trent before?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Arnold didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once. "More times than I can count," he said. "People who think yelling is strength. That fear is discipline." "What did you do?" Elias asked. Arnold looked ahead. "I waited. I stood. And when it mattered, I spoke." Elias looked down at the mats still rolled out in the yard. "You think we're doing the right thing?" Arnold leaned back. "If they keep coming," he said, "then you'll have your answer." And they did. Every day. By the time the second week began, the grass beneath the training mats had worn into soft, shallow grooves. The footwork drills had carved paths into the soil. Shoes were placed in tidy rows along the edge of the porch. Water bottles sat lined up like soldiers. The sun hit the backyard differently now, more golden, more certain. It was no longer just a yard. It had become something sacred. There was no sign, no banner, no name. But the students kept showing up, some before school, some after. The numbers weren't large, but they were steady. And that made all the difference. Elias no longer waited to be told what to do. He woke up earlier than he used to, rolled out the mats himself, checked the cones, adjusted the gloves. His voice was louder now when he called out the warm-ups, not because he wanted attention, but because he had grown into it. The others listened to him, not out of obligation, out of trust. Arnold watched quietly from the porch most mornings. He didn't speak unless it was necessary. But when he did, the kids listened like it was gospel. He walked between them during drills, corrected stances with a hand on the shoulder or a nod. He didn't scold. He didn't interrupt. He adjusted. And that was enough. One afternoon, as the last students packed up, Elias noticed a single glove left behind on the mat. He walked over, picked it up, then turned to find Arnold already watching him from the steps. Elias held up the glove like a question. Someone always leaves something behind, Arnold said, sipping his tea. Elias smiled. Not this time. They both sat on the porch again that evening, their routine as consistent as the training itself. The light was soft, fading behind the trees. Elias had a towel draped around his shoulders and dirt under his fingernails. Arnold sat beside him, resting his hands on his knees. You ever think about reopening a real gym? Elias asked. Arnold didn't answer right away. Then he looked at the yard. This is a real gym, he said. Elias laughed under his breath. With a roof, I mean. Arnold took a sip of his tea. Roofs are overrated. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't think I'd come back from that slap. Arnold didn't turn his head. That's because you were thinking about the slap, not the step you took after. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver badge Arnold had once held up in the gym. The edges were worn, but it still carried weight. He turned it over in his fingers. What do I do with this now? He asked. Arnold looked at the coin for a long time, then up at Elias. You carry it, he said, until you meet someone who needs it more than you do. The next day, the group trained with more focus than ever. No one told them to. It just happened. Footwork was sharper, eyes more serious. Even the smallest students moved with purpose. After the final stretch, they all gathered in the shade under the old oak at the edge of the yard. They didn't say anything at first. They just waited. Elias stood in the middle. His hands were by his sides. He wasn't nervous. He was present. Arnold stepped forward and reached into his pocket. Slowly, he held up the silver badge again. I used to carry this, he said, not to show it off, but to remind myself who I had to be, even when no one was watching. He paused, letting the silence settle. Then I gave it to someone who needed it more than I did, not because he was ready, but because he was willing. He handed the badge back to Elias, not with ceremony, just with certainty. You earned it, Arnold said, not for what you did in that gym, but for what you chose afterward. You didn't let anger decide who you become. Elias took the badge. His fingers closed around it like it was part of him. The others didn't cheer. They didn't clap loudly, but the respect in their eyes said everything. Later that evening, Arnold was folding chairs while Elias coiled resistance bands. One of the parents approached him slowly. She had watched every practice of the last week, but never said a word, until now. My son's never looked anyone in the eye before, she said. Now he walks up and shakes hands. That started here. Arnold looked at her, unsure what to say. He just nodded and went back to folding chairs. Because he hadn't come to start a movement, but one had started anyway. There were no banners, no social media pages. Just a patch of grass, a worn badge, and a small group of kids learning that strength didn't come from who shouted the loudest, but from who stood the longest. And somewhere between those early mornings and long afternoons, something real had taken root. By the end of the month, the circle had grown. Parents brought more mats. Someone donated a canopy for shade. A local hardware store offered cones and bands. A student brought a box of snacks for the younger kids. It wasn't just a class. It was a rebuilding of belief. That night, Elias sat on the back steps again, the badge resting on his knee. Arnold joined him. No words, just presence. The stars blinked slowly above them. You sure you don't want it back? Elias asked, holding up the badge. Arnold looked at it, then at him. It belongs to whoever's carrying the weight right now, he said. And that's not me. They sat together in silence. No victory speech. No camera. Just a knowledge that somewhere, beneath their feet, a foundation had been restored. Not of brick, but of trust. And in that quiet space, without walls, mirrors, or ranks, the real gym had already begun.